So people have thought for a long time that eating less might make life longer. Is there anything to that?
Well, there may be. It's quite interesting. This is something that we've studied in laboratory animals since the 1930s. And there's a huge history of success. If you let laboratory animals eat all they want, and you have another group that eats substantially less, we usually do 60% of the ad lib feeding, then those animals tend to live longer, and as we say, it's not so important that they live longer, but they stay healthy in many ways that we've measured it longer.
Just a little bit longer, a few days, or?
Well, it varies anywhere from 10% to about 40% longer, depends on the study.
Now you emphasized laboratory animals. Why was that?
Well, I emphasize that because when we've done this in animals that were recently in the wild, we haven't found the same thing.
Really?
And so that's kind of a puzzle. We don't know if it's because the laboratory animals are somehow special, or if because there's something about the diet of the wild animals that we don't really understand yet.
So let's go back to the original evolutionary explanation for why limited availability of food might extend lifespan.
Sure. So the evolutionary biologist's idea about this is that if dietary restriction increases survival, and if food is short in nature and you could go into this physiological state that would enhance your survival, then you could have a better chance of surviving until food again became abundant and you could start reproducing.
So it's a mechanism to adjust the organism to periods of scarcity by slowing things down so they can live longer.
That's exactly right. So slowing things down so they can live long enough to reproduce.
Sounds very sensible.
It does sound very sensible. I think it was a very sensible idea.
However,
unfortunately, we've done a lot of experiments that really call into question the validity of the idea. And what those experiments consist of is actually looking at what dietary restriction does to an animal. One of the things that it tends to do is suppress the immune system. That's no problem in our laboratory.
It's okay.
We've spent 50 years trying to get rid of all the germs in our laboratory, so it's not a problem for them. On the other hand, if you're running around in the field, breathing the air, then you're likely to catch an infectious disease. You don't want to be immunocompromised.
And more likely to die if your immune system is not cranked up.
That's right. And what we've done to test that idea, so we've actually taken laboratory animals and we've purposely infected them with, let's say, the flu. And we've seen that the ones that are on dietary restriction are more likely to die than the ones that aren't.
That's significant. So is that the only evidence against the idea?
Well, no. The other thing is that dietary restriction slows wound healing. When we think that in the field, being able to heal your wounds quickly without getting them infected is probably quite important. And so that just doesn't seem to fit with this idea. And then probably the biggest thing is that mice, which is where we've done most of these studies, don't live very long in the field. And so they can't afford...
How long does a mouse live in the wild?
A mouse in the wild lives 3 months on average. Maybe
what's the longest amount?
Around a year. Okay,
so they never survive to another season?
No, they don't survive to another season. So delaying...
And is that just because of death from aging, or is that death from all causes?
No, they probably relatively little death from aging. Most of wild mice, we think, die of predators and die of the cold. And so if food is going to be short for a year and you can't reproduce for a year, you're probably going to be
not going to make it up next year.
No, you're not going to make it up next year.
Right.
So those are some of the reasons that we think that fundamental idea, which was a reasonable idea, it's just not all good ideas turn out to be supported by experimental evidence.
So this seems like a pretty good example of a fine evolutionary hypothesis that sounded sensible at first until you really studied it, and then it turns out not to be right.
Right. And one of the things I don't think the public tends to realize about science, we're not always right. And we don't even think we're always right. We're often wrong, but we figure it out, and we figure out what is right.
But let's go on to that. Yeah. If that hypothesis isn't right, what's your new idea about?
So my new idea is that one of the things that animals in the wild will do when food is short is they will start eating things that they wouldn't normally eat.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
what kind of things?
Well, they might eat wheat that's infested with fungus. They might eat new plant material that's protected by toxins. And one of the things that dietary restriction does, and we know this by accident, is it protects against a wide range of toxins. So the idea is that animals that are restricted...
So it changes your biochemistry.
It changes your biochemistry so that you can eat and thrive on things that normally would be poisonous to you.
That would sound like something bad for your body, but maybe it has beneficial side effects.
Yes, one of the beneficial side effects may be that it makes you live longer under laboratory conditions. Now, it probably wouldn't make you live longer in the wild, but that doesn't matter as long as you could keep reproducing. If you could keep reproducing even when food was short, then that would be an evolutionary advantage. So that's a new hypothesis about why dietary restriction.
So how can you go about testing that?
Well, one of the things that you can do is you can measure all the defenses against these things, and people have done that. There's a huge series of studies at the National Center for Toxicological Research where they've given them virtually every toxin they could think of.
Poor mice.
Yeah, and in every case, the ones that were on dietary restrictions survived better, did better after eating.
Sometimes a lot better, I understand.
A lot better, yeah. Sometimes they didn't.
And there were implications for cancer chemotherapy too?
Yes, well, one of the
Moving to
things...
humans.
Yeah, one of the things that we thought was if dietary restriction can have these beneficial short-term effects against toxins, maybe we could use that in a case where we purposely give people toxins, such as cancer chemotherapy.
Right.
Now, we don't have the data yet in for people, but we do have the data for mice. And if we fast the mice for a few days and then give them a cancer chemotherapy regime, they survive much better and they lose less weight, and they seem to maintain their health much better than if they were fully fed all along.
From the graph I saw, it was a dramatic effect. It was several times longer.
Yeah, and sometimes none of the mice died if they were restricted, and all of the mice died if they weren't restricted. So
Wow.
that's a pretty big effect.
That's a huge effect. How about before surgery or before other kinds of physiological derangements?
Yeah, again, that's another thing that we don't yet know about people, but we've done this in mice where we fasted them for a few days before surgery, then give them some sort of serious invasive surgery, and the ones that fasted not only don't die as often, they recover faster. Pretty much they start eating again right after surgery, where the ones that were fully fed, they don't eat for a while after surgery.
They're not as hungry, probably.
They're not as hungry, and they're probably not feeling as well either.
Well,
yeah.
So both of these things have big implications for medicine. Is somebody following up?
Yeah, there are at least 3 studies ongoing where they're looking at the effects on surgery and at least 2 cancer chemotherapy studies. There may be more, but these are the ones that I know about. And that's pretty exciting because this is an insight from evolutionary biology that went straight into the clinic.
I'll bet the papers will be published with no mention of evolution, however. That's usually the way these things go.
I suspect you're right about that.